This video is all about the different materials or words that you can use in school, which is translated in Filipino and Hiligaynon. In English, it's school. In Filipino, it's paaralan. And in Hiligaynon, it's eskwelahan or buluthuan. School, paaralan, eskwelahan, buluthuan. It's a teacher in English, guro in Filipino, and manunudlo in Hiligaynon. Teacher, guro, manunudlo. In English, it's a student. In Filipino, it's an estudyante. And in Hiligaynon, it's also an estudyante. Student, estudyante. In English, it's a classmate. In Filipino, it's a kaklase or kamag-aral. And in Hiligaynon, it's a classmate. It can also be a classmate in Filipino. Classmate, kaklase, kamag-aral, classmate. In English, it's a head teacher. And in Filipino, it can be a punong guro or also a head teacher. Same through with Hiligaynon, which is also a head teacher. Head teacher, punong guro. In English, it's a librarian. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's also a librarian. Librarian. In English, it's a nurse. In Filipino, it's a nurse. And in Hiligaynon, it's also a nurse. Nurse, nurse. In English, it's a doctor. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's a doktor. Doctor, doktor. In English, it's a dentist. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's a dentista. Dentist, dentista. It's entrance in English. In Filipino, it's pasukan. And in Hiligaynon, it's suludlan. And in Karaya, it's kind of like surudlan. Entrance, pasukan, suludlan. In English, it's exit. In Filipino, it's labasan. And in Hiligaynon, it's guluwaan. Exit, labasan, guluwaan. In English, it's a paper. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's both papel. Paper, papel. It's a pencil in English, and in Filipino and Hiligaynon, it's both a lapis. Pencil, lapis. In English, it's a notebook. In Filipino, it's a kwaderno. And in Hiligaynon, it's also a notebook. Notebook, kwaderno. In English, it's a bag. And in Filipino and Hiligaynon, it's both a bag. Bag, bag. In English, it's a chalk. In Filipino, it's a tisa. And in Hiligaynon, it's also a chalk. Chalk, tisa. In English, it's a crayons. In Filipino, it's pangkulay. And in Hiligaynon, it's pangduag. Crayons, pangkulay, pangduag. In English, it's a scissors. In Filipino and Hiligaynon, it's both a gunting. Scissors, gunting. Shoes in English, it's both sapatos in Filipino and in Hiligaynon. Shoes, sapatos. In English, it's socks. In Filipino and Hiligaynon, it's both medyas. Socks, medyas. It's a homework or assignment in English, and in Filipino, it's takdang aralin or gawaing bahay, and in Hiligaynon, it's hilikuton sa balay, or it can also be an assignment or a homework. Homework, takdang aralin, gawaing bahay, hilikuton sa balay. In English, it's a ruler. In Filipino, it's a pansukat or also a ruler. And in Hiligaynon, it can be a pangtakos, or the commonly used one also is ruler. Ruler, pansukat, pangtakos. In English, it's snack. In Filipino, it's merienda. and in Hiligaynon, it's pamahaw. Snack, merienda, pamahaw. Pamahaw can also mean breakfast. It's a book in English, while in Filipino, it can be a libro or an aklat. And in Hiligaynon, it's also a libro. Book, libro, aklat. In English, it's a globe. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's both a globo. Globe, globo. In English, it's a clock. And in Filipino, it's an orasan. In Hiligaynon, it's relo. Clock, orasan, relo. In English, it's an ink. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's both tinta. Ink, tinta. It's map in English, and in both Filipino and Hiligaynon, it's mapa. Map, mapa. In English, it's an eraser. In Filipino, it's pambura. In Hiligaynon, it's pang-erase or also eraser. Eraser, pambura, pang-erase. It's a table in English, a lamesa or a mesa in Filipino, and in Hiligaynon, it can be a lamesa. And in Hiligaynon, it's also a lamesa. Table, lamesa, mesa. It's a chair in English, upuan in Filipino, and a bangko in Hiligaynon. Chair, upuan, bangko. It's a clinic in English and a klinika in both Filipino and Hiligaynon. Clinic, klinika. It's a chalkboard in English, pisara in both Filipino and Hiligaynon. Chalkboard, pisara. In English, it's a tape. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's also a tape, but the spelling is Filipinized. Tape and tape. In English, it's a bus. In both Filipino and Hiligaynon, it's a bus. Bus, bus. In English, it's a glue. And in Filipino, it's pandikit. While in Hiligaynon, it's patapik. Glue, pandikit, patapik. English in Filipino is ingles. And also in Hiligaynon, it's the same. It's also ingles. English, ingles. In English, it's math or mathematics. In Filipino, it's matematika. Same with Hiligaynon, it's also matematika. Math or mathematics and matematika. In English, it's water. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's both tubig. Water, tubig. It's food in English, pagkain in Filipino, and pagkaon in Hiligaynon. Food, pagkain, pagkaon. In English, it's a computer. In Filipino and in Hiligaynon, it's both a computer, but the spelling is kind of like Filipinized. Computer. Computer, computer. In English, it's a library. In Filipino, it's a silid-aklatan or also library. In Hiligaynon, it's also a library. Library, silid-aklatan, library. In English, it's a comfort room. In Filipino, it's a palikuran or a CR. Same through with Hiligaynon, it's also a CR. Comfort room, palikuran, CR. In English, it's science. In Filipino, it's agham or siyensya. In Hiligaynon, science, agham, siyensya. In English, it's breakfast. In Filipino, it's agahan or almusal. And in Hiligaynon, it's pamahaw. Breakfast, agahan, almusal, pamahaw. It's an answer in English, while in Filipino, it's a sagot. And in Hiligaynon, it's a sabat. Answer, sagot, sabat. It's a question in English, while in Filipino, it's a tanong, and in Hiligaynon, it's a pamangkot. Question, tanong, pamangkot. In English, it's lunch. In Filipino, it's tanghalian. And in Hiligaynon, it can either be paniaga or igma. Lunch, tanghalian, paniaga, igma. In English, it's dinner. In Filipino, it's hapunan. And in Hiligaynon, it's panyapon. Dinner, hapunan, panyapon. And that is all about our vocabulary words for school, both in Filipino and in Hiligaynon. If you learned something new from this video, please don't forget to click like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Moreover, you might also want to watch the next video on the screen. Maraming salamat, thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.